Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I've just reviewed my 18 books, 6,000 articles to identify what I believe are my best ideas. I thought it would be helpful to share those all with you in one podcast, one YouTube video. Anyway, I'm going to present them each in stripped down form to keep this from being too long. But if you want more detail about any of them, just Google the term I'll mention for each of them. There are about 22, 23 of these ideas. And then if you just Google the term and the name Nemco, you can get more information. But this should give you a taste of what I think are my best ideas, most helpful to the world, and then some of them are more individual to help to you. First, regarding education. The term I'm describing, this is school reinvented. Everybody knows that school is boring for most kids. All the way, whether it be from elementary school through graduate school. Too much is theoretical, or poorly taught, not applicable to your current life, and even if it was applicable currently, you forget about it by the time you need it. So here's my model, my very favorite model. I don't think I'm going to change a whole lot about what goes on from kindergarten through third grade or fourth grade, something like that. But after that, this is my vision. I want to start with the curriculum. Instead of teaching abstract stuff that nobody needs, and I'm shocked to see that even in today's Common Core curriculum, which is heavily prescribed throughout at least California and through much of the nation, they make you learn stuff like computing the area under the curve of a parabola in like the 5th grade. You don't need it ever, if you need it, you could learn it in college. They make you learn history that ostensibly is supposed to teach you the lessons of history that are applicable today, but rarely does that actually occur. They teach you, literature, certainly as we get older. I mean, we all, or many of us, read Silas Marner or The Intricacies of Shakespeare. Who the hell remembers that? Yet there are so many more crucial things for all students, and here I'm being egalitarian. It is elitist for us to require all of that when so many kids graduate without conflict resolution skills, budgeting skills, keeping them from being taken advantage of in consumer, trying to screw the consumer. In math, the ability to reason mathematically, that is to think think probabilistically, or to estimate. Those are the things that are central, that are foundational, that certainly should be learned before we get to crap like the causes of the Peloponnesian War, or stochastic processes in chemistry, or even, heaven forbid, a foreign language, where we all know that while it's very nice to be able to speak Spanish or Mandarin, it's very, very difficult to learn more than restaurant Spanish or Mandarin in a school setting. So I would revise the curriculum, first of all, along the lines I've just described, but maybe even more potent, or at least equally potent. That's the left hand. What the right hand should be doing. We all know, if we're really honest with each other, that teachers, like everything else, varies. Some are magnificent. Some are terrible. Most are somewhere in the middle. But imagine that every kid, rich and poor, from Alabama to Zululand, could get world-class instruction from the finest, most transformational, interesting teacher who's going to help you remember everything. Well, that's possible now with widely available internet, wide bandwidth internet. And that's true not just here, but all over in rural India. Everybody's got a cell phone. And so, I like to use the example of algebra. Taking a world-class algebra teacher and having him or her deliver great lessons in concert with some tech person who can create really wonderful visual demonstrations and simulations and gamify it, and create record keeping, so there's individualized record keeping for each student so that each student can proceed at his or her own pace, and it can be translated into any language. Imagine all kids got that, especially for difficult to teach subjects like algebra. And you combine that with my idea about a more relevant curriculum. And can you see how that, more than any other education innovation, could do more to improve learning, whether it be at the bottom end or at the gifted end? So, school reinvented. And this could be applied absolutely all the way through college and graduate school, where most courses are just poorly taught, especially at college and graduate school, where many, if not most professors, are hired and rewarded based on how much research they do, how much money they bring in research grants. Imagine instead that, think back to your, your Western civilization course, or your literature course, or your statistics course. Think of what you learned in graduate school. Imagine instead of the usual assortment of teachers, you got a world-class teacher in all those things. Wouldn't that be transformational for you and indirectly into society? So that's my idea basically for reinventing education. Now let's turn to work. I well understand that if you watch the media, any celebrity gets on the screen is going to say, follow your passion, do what you love. Well, they are cherry-picked, 1 in a million who become actors and journalists or scientists. But the truth is, if you follow your passion, generally, there's too many people following the same passion, and you're going to be either unemployed or asked to work for a volunteer or paid crappy and treated crappy because they know there's a million other people waiting in the wings to replace your job. I've been a career counselor to over 6,000 clients, and what I have absolutely believe is that career contentment, if not happiness, derives mainly from things having nothing to do with a cool career, not having to do with save the environment, not having to do with entertainment, not having to do with sports. It is reasonable pay, reasonable benefits, work-life balance, being treated with respect, a reasonable commute or a hybrid work or work at home, depending, and ethics where you're doing something that's constructive, and that could be anything from marketing a widget, including like a nut and bolt if it's important and necessary, to yes, the politically correct stuff like working on solar and wind and renewables, whatever. But I would encourage you, because there's so much less competition, away from the few cool careers, to not follow your passion, at least as a career. You want to be a screenwriter? Fine, do it for fun. You want to build furniture? Fine, do it for fun. But I believe in the Bill Gates model. Go where the money is. Gates made zillions on software, and then he's immunized every kid in Africa. Do what you love, do your passion as a sideline, and make money where money is to be made. Next. A work tip about procrastination. Procrastination is a cancer that affects more people than cancer does. We all procrastinate. I'm procrastinating doing my taxes as we speak. What I found is the single most potent anti-procrastination tool is what I call the 1-second task. Once you've decided you really should do the damn task, only do the first 1 second of it, whether it's to open the computer file, or to organize the first paper for your taxes, or to think about what the first sentence of this report is going to be. That 1-second task is a friendly, unintimidating amount of time. And as they say, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. By doing that first 1 second or few second task, and then maybe the next few second task, you are building momentum. That is what I found is the most potent anti-procrastination tool. The next idea that I want to share with you is what's called micro breaks. Haven't we all, after we've taken a week-long vacation or whatever, we're stressed before because we're trying to cram everything in before we leave, and then we get back, we're trying to catch up. If you're going away on vacation, you've got to get the dog sitter or the house, have somebody water the house plants, or stop the newspaper, or you're racing. You're always racing to the airport, traffic, parking, airport delays, COVID risk in the TSA, getting lost, expenses, unexpected expenses, and you come home and you're exhausted. I'm a huge believer in the micro break. It could be a 1-second break, like this, stretching, taking one deep breath. That's rejuvenating, takes no time, and there's no stress. Need a little more? Fine. Pet the dog for a minute. Take a walk for a minute. Walk around the block. Usually it's good to get out of your seat. Most of us are too sedentary. But if you need, so fine, play on the internet for a few minutes. Listen to your favorite song. But then get back to work. And that way, I do lots of those micro breaks every day. And very few long vacations. If I need a vacation at all, I tend to make it a day trip. But that keeps me from having the huge stress before and after my trip. So the micro break. Next tip I want to suggest is for people who are in a position to hire or in a hiring committee. I'm going to use perhaps a little hyperbolic term. I beg you to make your hiring very little based on the resume or on a standard interview or the references. Having been a career counselor to 6,000 clients, I can tell you that so many resumes, and the studies show this is not just my own experience, that a large percentage, a majority, a frightening number, like 75% of resumes and LinkedIn profiles contain exaggerations or outright lies. So sure, fine, use it as an initial screen, but view them carefully. And you can't use it as a tool for seeing how well people write or organize, because some of the weakest candidates are the ones most likely to hire a hired gun to write their resume. So you're seeing how good a resume writer the person is, not how good the candidate is. I mean, if it was ethical, why aren't resume writers right on the bottom? This resume was written by Jane Jones, a resume writer. So only use the resume or LinkedIn profile as the basic initial screen. And interviews are notoriously invalid. Again, the weakest candidates are more likely to hire a coach and prepare perfect answers for your greatest strength, your greatest weakness, why have you been unemployed, blah, 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 blah. Garbage. The most valid test for whether an employee would be good are simulations of difficult tasks that the candidate would have to do on the job. Make your initial screening instead of, fill out this application, or you can have them fill out the application, but have a 15-minute quiz that test what the person would be really like on the job. And it could even be video. I remember a Northwestern life insurance thing where they showed a video of a simulation of a customer raising an objection or whatever. And then the candidate or the trainee would, on their webcam, they would give an answer, how they would respond to this objection. Well, that could tell you a lot if you're hiring a salesperson, for example, or a customer service person, what the person's like. Think hard if you're an employer. What could you ask that would really distinguish between an average candidate and a great candidate? That's gold. In the actual interview itself, the same thing. Simulations. If the person's going to be a manager running meetings, set up a 5-minute, instead of the interviewees, usually there's a team of interviewers. Instead of just having them ask the questions that are completely coachable, like, tell me about something you overcome, which is completely coachable. If that manager person is applying for a managerial position, have the interviewers simulate being members of a meeting and have the candidate run a 5-minute meeting with one agenda item. That will tell you a lot about the person's emotional intelligence, substantive knowledge, general intelligence, everything. And don't rely on references very much at all. Even the weakest candidates can get good references, and I've had, unfortunately, some candidates who've wanted to use who are terrible employees. And to be honest, those are not people I ended up wanting to continue working with, but they wanted to use their boyfriend or their girlfriend to pretend that they were former boss, and they list them as references. Oh yes, John was a wonderful employee. Trust the simulations. That's my idea. I call it demo hiring. Okay, by the way, if you Google that, you're not going to find demo hiring. It's just I created that here on the spot for you. But if you look at NEMCO hiring, if you want to learn more about that, but that gives you the essence of what's important. A word about, one of my ideas that I'm proud of is career counseling reinvented. Standard career counseling, partly for reasons I implied, because you tend to be a hired gun who makes the candidate look better than he is, and therefore depriving more worthy candidates who don't spend money on a career counselor, denying them of a fair shot at the job, But what really career counseling at its best, and having had 6,000 clients, I can tell you where I've added the most value ethically. It's helping people who are already employed to either manage their stress better, manage their communication better, manage their office politics better, manage their public speaking better, develop career goals, what skills they want to develop, what will be the next jobs they want, do they want to become self-employed, how do they deal with the stresses that come from out of work. Very often relationships cause stress that bleeds over into the work life, and we talk about that. That, in my judgment, is where career counseling should focus, and that would be career counseling reinvented, because most career counselors focus on what career do you want to choose, which ends up often being unrealistic, or how to land a job, which often ends up being unethical because you're making the candidate look better than they really are. Much better to focus on the things I mentioned, as well as also salary negotiation is a perfectly appropriate thing for good career counselors to focus on. But by temperament or training, most career counselors don't have that. But I would urge career counselors you can't be an expert at all those things that I just mentioned, but find the one or two or three things that build on your natural strengths, whether it be in negotiation, whether it be in helping people with office politics, whether it be helping people with time management, stress management, whatever. Become an expert in those few things, communication, public speaking, and make that your brand, especially within a particular industry. If you're, say, a burned out lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or whatever, you should probably specialize in, and you want to become a counselor, specialize in counseling people in your profession, because you have subtle insider knowledge. That's how I would reinvent career counseling. Now I want to talk about government. These are not particularly for personal development, but wise. It is crazy how we select our leaders, locally and state and federal. Most times when you look at the ballot, you either know only what you see in the voter's pamphlet, which is a sales pitch, or the spinmeisters who have done commercials or appeared on the candidate appears on the show and they're totally primped up and they say what they want to say, their talking points. You don't know crap about what they're really like, let alone for the low-level jobs that are on the ballots. You're voting for judges. You have no idea who that person is. I believe that we venerate democracy, but we don't really have a democracy when the spinmeisters are manipulating who we vote for. So I believe it is a fatally flawed election. I am a fan of what I call don't elect, select. For example, just as we now know that investing in what are called index funds, which is, I'll explain in a minute, a passively selected group of stocks, whether it be the Standard & Poor's 500 or the largest companies in India, there are these market baskets of stocks, and those outperform where the mutual funds where there's this guru who tries to pick out what's going to beat the market. It's very hubristic to think he can beat the market, but anyway, that concept could equally be applied to how we select our leaders. So whether it's a local city council, or it's a state government, or it's a federal legislature, far wiser to use what I call passive criteria. So for example, the philosopher who is most cited this year, the scientist who is most cited this year, the teacher of the year as selected by the National Council of Teaching or teachers of whatever, the cop of the year, the most awarded cop of the year, etc., and some random people, so that there is it's important to have that kind of diversity matters a lot. Ideological diversity, experience diversity, class diversity, yes. And then those people would vote to select their executive officer, whether it's the mayor or the governor or the president. That takes money out of politics. it ensures that good people get selected. Right now, to want to be in politics, you in a way it selects not for the best people, because you got to run a 4-year press the flesh campaign and raise money and not be a legislator or a local executive, mayor, as I said, mayor, governor, president. This would ensure that great people get selected. I'm going to be just really candid. My wife has been asked to run for office many times, to be state senator, etc. She's brilliant, she's beautiful, she's moderate, she's ethical to the max, common sense, great public speaker, and she said no every time. Why? She doesn't want to run a 4-year press the flesh campaign. Really good people don't want to waste their time doing that stuff. So sure, there's some great politicians and great leaders, but on average, they're not good. Where don't elect, select is a far wiser campaign. Let's say, but that's seen as, too radical, because it would have to be passed by the government, and the foxes are guarding the hen house, and they're never going to approve that. So more realistic, to try to reduce campaigns to 2 weeks. Right now, there are 4-year campaigns, which again deters good people from running. There's so much money in it, money required in order to win. A 2-week campaign, 100% publicly funded. And I'm not some liberal radical who wants everything publicly funded. I'm not. But in this case, we want to take money out of politics. We want people to be our leaders who serve the people, not be beholden to donors. In a 2-week, completely publicly funded campaign, where there would be voter statements, candidate statements, not created by them, but by a neutral body like Consumers Union. That's Consumer Reports. Or other neutral body. That would be and that becomes available online. It becomes available in most major media and in the voter information pamphlets. That gives people, valid basis on who to judge. Those profiles would have their voting record and their platform and their bios. That gives us a legitimate basis for judging, for voting. 2-week campaigns. A word about taxation. As I'm now involved in doing my taxes, the amount of human time that is wasted, individuals and accountants, working the system, putting together all your receipts, filing it on the tax return. It's an enormous, billions of dollars. And then there's this enormous IRS where they're hiring now 87,000 more agents, costing us taxpayers a fortune. Imagine that there was no form taxation, and that's my idea. The money simply comes out of your, whether it be, and I'll leave for another day, whether it needs to be payroll coming out of your payroll, a certain fixed amount, a certain percentage, and it can be, we'll leave aside how progressive or non-progressive it's going to be. Usually people who make more have to pay more, fine. But it just is, or there's no return. It's just on average. Some people are going to get screwed by that. Some people are going to benefit. But it's going to be revenue neutral. We're not trying to raise taxes or lower taxes. We're getting rid of the enormous hassle and the enormous cost of creating taxation. And there'll be no cheating because it's automatic. No form taxation. Reinventing healthcare. I hate this current system because there are too many middlemen who have incentives to reduce care. All the insurance companies and Medicare, they're all about controlling costs. They're not really about optimizing health. And of course, they're taking a big chunk out, whether it be the government bureaucrats at Medicare and Medi-Cal, or it be the private insurers. They're taking a big chunk out. And there's something unethical, especially when you're talking about life and death, about having one-size-fits-all healthcare. What I would do if I were running the healthcare system is create what I call flex care. Every human being, simply by virtue of being human, no matter how much of a miscreant they are, is entitled to a basic level of health care. Getting to see a physician assistant or nurse practitioner as needed, not your choice, but one. No experimental treatments, but basic treatments for whatever. Basic medications, absolutely. But if you are contributing to this, if you are a taxpayer, you are entitled to have a higher level of care. You get to see an MD. You get more flexibility in terms of treatments. Everybody, if you had stage 1 cancer, could get treatment no matter how poor, no matter what. But if you're stage 3, it becomes very costly, and then people who are paying into the system, people who are taxpayers, can get access to a broader range of treatments. And there should always be the option to supplement with private insurance or private fee-for-service. And in fact, that could be an option too, that the basic model would be fee-for-service, so that people could walk with their feet and choose the providers that provide the best value for the money. And of course, what's critical in all of this is that there need to be completely transparent records of each practitioner in terms of their success rate with various procedures, risk adjusted, because obviously if somebody's got, multiple comorbidities or they're a particular serious version of a disease, their success rate is going to be lower. But if it's risk adjusted, that could give you at least good consumer information, and that should be required. So reinventing healthcare, a basic level of care for everybody, paid for by a taxpayer. Right. After that, it could be fee-for-service as your basic model, with buying or a higher tiered insurance plan where people would be covered by taxation, but at a higher level of care and options. Choose your own doctor, have a greater number of treatment options that would be exposed to you. I call it flex care. Again, I have not written that before, so you're not going to find anything about that on the internet next to my name. Now about relationships. Every relationship, that's not wrong. Many relationships could use what I call a marriage summit. That is to meet, whether it be over dinner or on vacation or whatever, to spend a few minutes talking about each of the major issues in your life, where each of you does not try to talk about what the other one needs to change, but what each of you yourself needs to change, regarding money, regarding children, regarding sex, regarding communication, regarding income, regarding affection, regarding, I think I said communication, whatever. Take a few minutes to say, do I need to change anything about my communication? Do I need to change anything about the way in which we do sex, or how often we do sex? Do I need to do anything different about money? Each of you, and then you write it down and you check in the next day to see how well you did on that one thing. Or it could be on all, But the point is to have a single goal in one or more of those areas I mentioned, and then check in the next night briefly. And another little part of that works very well is because it's easy to forget and fall back in your habits. But when the other person, let's say, one person is a poor listener and is looking at their phone and not giving you any undivided attention even for the 5 minutes to say about how was your day. Instead of lecturing, let's say I was not listening well to my wife who was talking about her day. All she would do is put her finger up as a reminder. That way it's instant, it's not a lecture, and it gives me the feedback I need to get back on track. That's the marriage summit. Next, I want to talk about flex marriage. This notion that for richer or poorer, till death do us part, in sickness and in health, is too much of an ask for most people. That's why 50% of people divorce. I believe in flex marriage. I like the idea of commitment, but it needs to be more flexible. And sure, it can just be informal, we live together or not. But I like the idea of a little flex marriage contract or flex relationship contract where we agree on the length of the contract, monogamy, money, issues around children, whatever is important to you, you agree to and write down and sign. Of course, it's, in an ideal world, I think it could be legally binding, but I'm not a big fan of bringing the law in. I see the pain of divorce. It's long, it's expensive, it's contentious, it's horrible. But I like the idea of a flex marriage contract that you honor as a sacred promise to each other. Maybe legally bound, maybe not. Flex marriage. Next one is what I call motivational parenting, and again, there's no term for this that I've used in the past in writing, so if you Google me and that, you're not going to find it. We too often rely on rewards and punishments to motivate kids. I think it's wiser to encourage what's called an internal locus of control, internal motivation. So I like to use the example of a kid, if I have a child, and it's dinner time, and I want him or her to come to dinner, and she said, no, I want to finish this TV show, I want to finish this video game, I want to finish my homework. And too often there's either yelling or wheedling or rewards. I'll give you this. You can have dessert if you come. That is extrinsic motivation. I'd rather build internal motivation by invoking a bit of, and it's a dirty word, but invoking a bit of guilt. So I'd say, Johnny, I know you want to be a grown-up kind of kid and you want to be a good member of this family. Your responsibility is to come to the table because we'll be waiting for you. Can we count on you? And I can make it easy for him to say yes. And he'll have to say yes. He probably won't say yes, but will be more likely to toddle to the table. And even if he doesn't do it, no, I want to finish my game. You've planted seeds. And if you're focusing mainly on that, and then if he doesn't come to the table, start dinner without him. And then if he eventually comes in, Johnny, I'm disappointed in you. And that's it. That tends to build the intrinsic motivation and not resentment and a fight. Can't always do it. I recognize in the real world, real people can't always be that good. But as my foundational principle of parenting, I like the idea of what I'm calling motivational parenting, building internal motivation for the kid. Now, here are some ideas that are miscellaneous that I believe in. Our justice system too often does not reward justice. From a liberal perspective, too often the rich can hire the best lawyers and the poor are stuck with sometimes public defenders who aren't that great. And the larger issue is also that you've got these two smart people, lawyers, who are not seeking the truth, but they're seeking to advocate for their party. The truth often gets backseated. And yes, there is some value to the clash of ideas, but I believe greater good would accrue if we used what is often used in some European courts, which is a tribunal, where there are two lawyers, but instead of each of them fighting for their side, they divide the work of investigating the issue. You're going to investigate these, if it's in a divorce, for example. You're going to talk to the spouse and the children. You are going to review their the other one's going to review their financial records. So it's going after the truth rather than trying to win. I think having these neutral lawyers rather than advocacy lawyers would yield greater good in the long run. I call them truth trials. Again, I've not used that word before. I prepared that in preparing to talk with you, so you won't find it in searching for more information on the internet. The next idea that I think is really central, maybe one of the most central of all that I've shared with you, is what I call trusty media. Every survey, especially by Gallup, shows that the media is among the least trusted of all of our societal institutions, somewhere ranking with used car salesmen. And there's good reason for that, because unlike in the old days where there was a primacy on journalists presenting multiple sides of an issue, trying to be as neutral as possible, now it's advocacy journalism. I'm not talking about the editorial page, in ostensible news, whether it be on CNN or Fox or the New York Times or whatever, they want to manipulate you into the world to believing and voting and acting as they deem wise. And it's ironic because journalists, by and large, have not spent much time in the real world. They went from the academic bubble where they learn what is the dominant worldview that's presented in academia, to the same worldview in the world of journalism without the real world experience that's needed to really understand all the issues in full dimension. So what I would encourage to make media more trustworthy is, first of all, I'll just say it simply, to realize the near sacred responsibility that journalists, as people who are mind molders in our society, who dictate who we elect, how we vote, how we behave, what we care about, to think in fuller dimension, to think not just about in your bubble, but to really talk with openly to people who live in the real world outside of those journalism bubbles, liberals and conservatives. There is much wisdom that resides left of center, but much wisdom does reside outside of the liberal bubble, especially regarding the issues of merit, as opposed to redistribution to society's have-nots independent of merit. I think if we are to have a media that really makes for a better world, that encourages full dimension critical thinking. We need journalists whose primary goal is to look in full dimension at issues and report them as fairly as they can. Of course we all have our biases, but that their goal should try to be as statesman and stateswoman-like as possible. It's not existing now at all, and it's getting worse. That's what I call trusty media, and that's what we need to do. A word about altruism. There is a movement now called effective altruism, which intrinsic has a huge bias, which again is toward redistribution. Take from the givers to those who have the least, the starving in Africa, the illiterate in America, etc. That is excellent virtue signaling, but if we care really about making the world better, we need to give to those and to causes with the greatest potential to improve the world. My favorite example of this is gifted kids in low-income and moderate blue-collar schools. Rich kids do get who are very bright, they get the attention that they need. But kids who are poor and blue-collar, who are gifted, intellectually gifted, have enormous unmet potential that is unlikely to be realized because they don't have rich parents. They don't have the brilliant teachers from fancy private schools. So in my judgment, more effective altruism is to think not about giving to the least among us, as the New Testament would have us believe, but to those with the greatest potential to profit. And one more example. At a much higher level, we tend to focus, if we're giving to a university, we tend to focus on giving scholarships to the poor. First of all, that does very little good because all it usually does is replace money that would have come from the college's coffers or the government's coffers with money from your pocket. Better to give to underfunded, in my judgment, research that could make a big difference. I am a believer that intelligence, cognitive functioning, reasoning, whatever you want to call it, thinking, higher order thinking, complex thinking, is prerequisite to all accomplishment, to better cures for diseases, for better iPhones, for better vaccines for COVID and everything else. But basic research tends to not get funded, especially in areas that are not politically correct, like the study of the biological basis of reasoning skills. So I have donated some money to a couple of top universities, scholars who are experts at understanding the biological basis of cognition, higher order reasoning, in hopes that eventually we can help address the problem of many people in this ever more information-centric, cognitively demanding society having greater ability to negotiate it without turning to crime and drugs or simply frustration and poverty and working at a very low-paid job. Because mundane jobs are going to get automated by just general computerization, automation, artificial intelligence. And of course, ethics is everything to me, very important. So we're certainly not talking about any kind of coercive thing, but giving poor parents, especially low-income parents who are multi-generational poor, the option for what I'm metaphorically calling an intelligence pill would have a much better chance than the trillions of dollars we have spent trying to close the achievement gap, of giving all people, rich, poor, all races, whatever, the option, non-coerced, subsidized by Medi-Cal, by the government, by the taxpayer, to get what I'm calling this intelligence pill, whatever that's going to be. A cup of coffee is an intelligence pill as well. I mean, it increases cognitive functioning. But understanding the biological basis of intelligence is going to make it give many more options for those parents in concert with their healthcare provider or not. And funding the basic foundational research is not very fundable right now. But I consider that an example of more effective altruism than what is defined hubristically as effective altruism. Now I want to talk a little bit about gender justice. We are in an era where when I grew up, it was true that women felt they were limited in their career options, and they didn't have birth control pills. And they were felt that to be, teachers, librarians, etc. And I am convinced that the first generation of women's movement was very, very valuable. And I'm very proud. My own wife is the superintendent of schools and a nationally known figure. My daughter is a highly successful lawyer who specializes in prosecuting sex crimes. And I've tried to be as feminist as I can in terms of giving them equal opportunity to everything. But we are in an era where men, whether you're watching commercials or learning school curriculum or news reports or in hiring practices, where men are especially white men, are seen as persona non grata if their accomplishments are tainted by privilege, not earned privilege. And so I cannot tell you, as a career counselor who's had 6,000 clients, 2/3 women, but I have many men clients, how many are in tears or angry knowing for sure that they were much more competent and hardworking and ethical and had a great track record, and they lose out to jobs or promotions to people of a different demographic because of the demographic, who have far less qualifications, brain power, being low maintenance, the whole combination. We need to treat both, whatever values all these I see these drawings of equity, which are just misleading bumper sticker rhetoric. We need, at this point in time, in 2023 and beyond, the greatest good will accrue to treating both genders on the merit. I think about healthcare as the worst example. When women have the deficit, say there are not 50% of engineers are women, we consider that an intrinsic wrong and we spend billions of dollars for redress. But when men have the ultimate deficit, we die 5 years younger and live our worst decade in worse health. There are 4.4 widows for every widower. All we see is another run for breast cancer, and I've reviewed the literature on PubMed, the vast majority, for the last 60 years, of research and outreach that's gender-specific related to healthcare is on women. Why is that we have the ultimate deficit, and yet when there's gender-specific research or outreach, it's way disproportionately toward women? That's simply not justice. That's not fair. It's not right. Gender justice. Treating both genders, and of course, binary, it doesn't have to be binary, I don't care, fine, matrix. Treating all people based on the merits, not this gender bifurcation where women and people of color get so disproportionately more called equity because the playing field's not level. I don't believe that argument is dispositive anymore. The amount of reverse discrimination in choosing students for college, for medical schools even, when life and deaths, in hiring, in promotion, is not good for the world. It's not good for anybody. I think also if I was a person of color, and it's widely known that there is reverse discrimination in selection for colleges and in hiring and promotion. Say I'm a fully meritorious person of color, and certainly there are many, many, many who are. I am saddled with the perception among many people that I only got into a good college, a selective college, or the job, at least in part because of my melanin. That's a cross to bear that they shouldn't have to bear. That's all I want to say about gender justice. Next, what I want to call is New Israel. It was a mistake in my judgment for the United Nations to plop. When they created the new state of Israel after the Holocaust and 6 million Jews were dead, they needed a safe homeland. But to plop it in the middle of, surrounded by enormous large amounts of Arab countries, and a tiny sliver is Israel, surrounded by them, when there's been 1,000 years enmity between the Arabs and Jews, is a formula for failure, and it has been a failure. Despite fortunes that America has given in support, and other countries in support of Israel, and now the amount of terrorism and violence that accrues, and Iran's nuclear threat to Israel, I propose something very radical. I call it New Israel. The largest concentration of Jews in the world outside of Israel is New York City. And there is, fortunately, large amounts of forest land, empty land, just north of New York City, maybe within 100 miles of New York City. Rather than spending billions of dollars more on defense of Israel, causing, which ends up causing deaths of innocent Palestinians, as well as encouraging the fighting that is destroying many Israelis' lives, I think the United States should cede a small sliver, an Israel-sized sliver of land, somewhere north of New York City, and call it New Israel. Of course, the Israelis who live in Israel would not be forced to move, but would be given encouragement, maybe even incentives, to come to New Israel. And the current Israel could become indeed a Palestinian state, where they could run it themselves without Jews around. And I think that is ultimately going to be the most likely way to end this thousands of years enmity between the Arabs and the Israelis, the Jews. Even though Israel is their biblical homeland, I understand that. But the perfect is the enemy of the good, so I advocate for New Israel. And the last thing I want to mention is kind of trivial. I am an atheist, but I am Jewish by birth. And we're about to approach Passover. Like all Jewish services and synagogues, and including the Passover Seder, which is a kind of a dinner but ceremonial and takes quite a long time, most Jews are not very religious. They don't speak Hebrew. They don't want to speak Hebrew. The rituals mostly are not of great interest. And usually, at minimum, it's like a 1-hour retelling of the Jews' escape from Egypt, and a lot of prayers. My definition of what a modern good Seder would be, since the main theme of Passover is freedom. The Jews were enslaved by the Egyptians and they escaped, so fine. It should be about freedom. And freedom has got many, many different manifestations today. Liberal, conservative. Libertarian types, conservative types want less government involvement in their life. That's one form of freedom. Liberals would say blacks are still in chains, metaphorically, and need more help from the rest of us. There's, and Israel, how free are Israel? How free are we to say what we want? Political correctness. There's so much. Freedom is the theme of Passover, but it has so many modern implications. If I were running the Seder, all I would do is have a brief little ceremonial part. Maybe there's this thing called charosis, where they show the mortar that the enslaved Jews in Egypt had to they build bricks. Now there's this, you make this mix of nuts and apples and a little wine, and that's called charosis, and it tastes good. And the ceremony is you put it between two pieces of matzah to represent that symbol. Fine. Something like that is fine, and a brief, maybe a 3-minute telling of the Jews' escape from Egypt. But most of it should be a discussion about freedom in its various manifestations. And Jews in general like to intellectually go back and forth, so it's very consistent with the dominant Jewish culture. And then have a nice dinner, a family dinner or whatever. So that's how I would reinvent the Passover Seder. And it has implications for services. It's crazy. The Jewish services, unlike Christian services, they tend to be 2 hours long, 2.5 hours long. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the two major holidays, it's like almost all day. And most of it in Hebrew. There's no reason, that's good reason why so few Jews are practicing religion. They should be shorter, they should be in English, They should be ethics and values centric, not Bible centric, not praise to Almighty God centric. Anyway, and the last thing I want to talk about is it's been suffused through a number of the things I've said so far. And that is, I do believe that the three most important words for a better world is that merit above all. Every group, from the fat to blacks to women to ugly people, to Holocaust survivors, children of Holocaust survivors, to Holocaust survivors, descendants of Japanese internment camps, the Chinese descendants from the Chinese and the railroads, or everybody can find basis for aggrievement. But once everybody is asking for something other than merit to be used in legislation, in hiring, in college admissions, you are moving merit to the back seat, which means worse customer service, worse doctors, worse scientists, worse lawyers, worse everything. The greatest good and more resentment from those who are not being judged on their merits, and less likely to create e pluribus unum. With diversity we are with one. I've Baudelarized that. I believe that if the world operated more from just those three words, not redistribution toward egalitarianism, but merit above all, maybe merit is all, that's at least this guy's view of what would make a better world. In any event, I'm Marty Nemko. I appreciate your watching, or if you're listening on a podcast, I appreciate your listening. As always, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And I like to end all podcasts with my very favorite quote, which I do believe is more relevant today than ever in light of much of what I've said. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.